Okay, hello everybody. I'm Honolulu Ferguson from the Big Island, and we're down here at Iolani Palace. Today is the 18th. Yesterday was the anniversary and commemoration of the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And so I come down here twice a year to do a vigil, and this is my 14th year. And last year when we were down here, I had the pleasure of meeting Williamson Chang. By the way, this is Professor Williamson Chang from the Princeton School of Law. And when I met him last year, he gave a 45-minute presentation on how the state of Hawaii is actually illegal in Hawaii because there is no treaty of annexation or treaty of cession. And Mr. Chang has presently been working on a thesis, on a book on this very subject. So I want to introduce you to Mr. Williamson Chang from the Princeton School of Law.
Thank you, Honolulu. It's my pleasure to be here. Well, it's not my pleasure to be here because this is the anniversary of the overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii, the events of the 16th and 17th and 18th of January in 1893 were tragic events where the United States landed troops, and but for the landing of those troops, the Kingdom of Hawaii would not have been overthrown. So here we are on the palace grounds. The palace is over there. The Judiciary building is down there. There's some buildings that were built for the federal government. Those are still unceded lands. We have a territorial building, and behind us the burial grounds. And I've been doing this work for a long time. I was a water rights lawyer, and I fought the big five in the sugar industry, and that took 20 years, and I fought it with Chief Justice William S. Richardson, who was Chief Justice from 1966 to 1982, and we won. We got the waters changed from something that was private property that belonged to the sugar industry, that could be bought and sold by them as they please, moved around the islands, moved away from the windward side where Hawaiians grew their taro, moved to the leeward side where sugar grew, and took all the water there, forcing the Hawaiians out of the windward side, forcing them away from taro. Taro was central. It was the basis of family life. It was sustained before the coming of Cook 1 million Hawaiians. Not even knowing about groundwater, we had enough water. Now today we're in deep straits. But I started in water rights. And I'll make it short here. What I discovered is the law changed. The law used to be only for taro water rights. That was the king's intention. But the overthrow occurred because they wanted to change that law. They wanted to take the water to the leeward side. So in many ways, the overthrow was economically and politically based. They wanted to change the law. And how do you change the law? Well, you take over the kingdom so that you can appoint your own chief justice and justices who can write new laws. And so that's one of the reasons for the takeover and the overthrow, was to support the sugar industry in being able to take water from the windward side to the leeward side. I did that research, and the key to what I'm saying is I found out that they cheated in terms of the law. They manufactured a case by which it said water could be owned as private property. This wasn't true. And they said, oh, because of this old case, the king passed this case. The king wants it to be private property. It wasn't true. And I began to think, if they cheated in the area of water rights, would they have cheated in the area of the annexation of Hawaii, the taking over of Hawaii? Would they have played fast and loose with the law? And I did some research, and I was astounded. I was astounded to read in the congressional record the debates on a treaty of 1897 where it was rejected by the United States Senate. Now, as a law professor, there's only 3 ways to take territory of another place if you're a country. You can be the first one to discover it if it's not claimed by another country. That's what happens with the little islands, or they put the flag and they put the bottle. No one else has claimed that land. It's not under anyone else's sovereignty. You can say you discovered it. Okay, other than that, there's only 2 ways to take it. One is, and this makes sense, one is without their consent, and the other is with their consent. And without their consent is called conquest and war. And that is something that has happened much times over history, but today is illegal. The United Nations doesn't allow you to conquer new territory or conquer countries. The way they did in World War II with Hitler, the way they did with Attila the Hun, it's against the United Nations Charter, it's against international law. So you cannot take, and the law was changing at the time of the annexation, so the conquest principle has been changing, and so it's no longer legal to do that. What was the rule back in 1893? Well, it was changing, but here's the real point. The United States has never, ever claimed Hawaii by conquest or war. They won't say that. Why? Because it would put them in a very bad light. It would mean that morally they would have to give it back, or at least morally they would have to pay reparations. So it's consent or conquest. And consent means the two nations agree that if it's the territory is under one nation, the other nation says, I'd like that territory. That territory belongs to the other nation. The other nation has to give its consent. And what we mean is there has to be a treaty. So the bottom line, if you take away anything today from this lecture, is I've studied this. There's no treaty by which Hawaii was acquired by the United States. There were 3 times they tried a treaty. Once after Kamehameha III died, and he was worried, this was back in the 1850s, he was worried that another nation would conquer Hawaii or just take it over. So he secretly said to the United States, you make us a state, I'll sign it. But as if the gods were acting, the ship that brought that treaty back with the United States signature came a day after the king died. You cannot part with the Aina. The Aina is sovereign. Just like you cannot take rocks from Hawaii. Yeah. You'll get sick. You cannot, if you're a leader, it's not pono. That's what Hawaiians know. Okay, the second time they tried a treaty was after the day that we are sadly memorializing today, the day of the annexation of Hawaii. Was 1893, January 17th and 18th, and the United States had negotiations, secret negotiations with those who overthrew the Kingdom of Hawaii, that it was going to be a 2-step process. Overthrow, backed by U.S. forces, followed by a treaty by which Hawaii would become part of the United States. We know this from letters between the overthrow annexationists who were writing back and forth to each other. I have a letter that I found in Washington where they discuss, oh, let's bribe the Queen, maybe that's cheaper. Let's bribe all the Hawaiian legislatures, maybe that's cheaper. Oh, we got to worry about the contract laborers that we're hiring for the sugar company. Why? Because in the United States, slavery is illegal. If you become part of the United States, how are you going to maintain the plantations? You've seen 12 years of a slave, maybe you haven't. But the United States abandoned slavery, abolished it, and Hawaii still had slavery well into 1890s. So we have those letters. But also, it is not coincidence that the day after the overthrow, the annexationists chartered a ship. They chartered a ship called the Claudine to take a delegation to San Francisco, whereby they would travel by train to Washington to negotiate with the Secretary of State of the United States. Excuse me. The Secretary of State of the United States was named John W. Foster. They were there by February 4th. And we have a complete record of the discussions between the United States and the annexationists. They drafted a treaty on February 10th for the annexation of Hawaii. Now, if that treaty had been ratified by the Senate, all pow. We don't have anything to grumble about. We could grumble about the overthrow, but this would be United States territory. They would be doing what they're doing now legally. But what I'm saying is that treaty was rejected. That treaty was rejected because it was late in the term of the president. President Harrison was the president. This was February of 1893, and in those days, a new elected president came in March. And the newly elected president was Grover Cleveland. They didn't know which way Grover Cleveland stood on Hawaiian annexation. But the senators wanted to wait and see how Grover Cleveland felt about annexation. And moreover, there was a backlash. The Americans taking over Hawaii was not very American. It was not very democratic. It didn't fit in with the values that America had, that governance was by consent. And the Hawaiian people had never given their consent. So there was a lot of criticism about what the United States had done. Cleveland was very careful. He sent a commissioner named James Blount here to investigate the facts. This is what you've heard called the Blount Report. It's a 700-page report. It's very meticulously done, very carefully done. He interviewed everybody involved in the overthrow, and he concluded that the United States was wrong, that it was a violation of international law, it was a violation of the treaties that the United States had with the Kingdom of Hawaii. He wrote that. He left. He wasn't a very popular guy in Hawaii, but he left and he gave that report to Cleveland. And Cleveland read it, and Cleveland was astounded. So in the same year that the overthrow took place, 1893, in December 18th of 1893, President Cleveland made a public speech where he admitted the United States was wrong, violated international law, violated the treaties with Hawaii, and here's a very important point. He promised to restore the Kingdom of Hawaii. Now, we all know that when the Queen faced the American Marines, she told her military soldiers to stand down, lay down your guns. I investigated what kind of guns they had. They had very sophisticated guns. They had Gatling guns. They had the best rifles. There was 3,000 of them. They could have defeated the U.S. Marines, but I guess it was in her mind. She thought that the United States president, when he heard about this, would do the right thing. And I suppose she also thought that a war with the United States may trigger an expansion. But in any event, she did not surrender to the United States. And a lot of people think she surrendered to the United States, and that's how Hawaii became part of the United States. That's not true. If you read her letter, she yielded her executive authority to the United States, saying in effect, I trust you, you have a constitution, these are the values of America, you'll do the right thing. And if you know about the assignment of authority, that's what Keanu Sai argues. He still claims that he still believes the kingdom is in existence and that they, as substitutes for Liliuokalani, have the assignment of power. The assignment of power is in Barack Obama now. And Barack Obama is responsible for Hawaii. Now, so the Queen didn't surrender. The revolutionaries, the rebels, whatever you want to call them, the annexationists, they created the provisional government on January 18th and 19th, calling Dole the president. They didn't have a structured government. They never expected to be in power very long because they expected the United States to pass the Treaty of January 10th and make Hawaii part of the United States. But remember I mentioned that Harrison was an outgoing president in March. Nobody wanted to ratify a treaty in late February before a new president came in, and they did the right thing because President Cleveland withdrew the Senate's treaty, withdrew the treaty from the Senate, so the Senate never got to vote on it. So that's number 2 treaty that did not pass.
Does that have anything to do with the Kuwait petition?
No, that's the 1897 treaty.
Okay.
The Kuwait petition comes in 1897. So we have a period of 1893 in which the United States has not annexed Hawaii. Hawaii is still a nation, except the government has changed. You know, the nation never went out of existence. It's merely like the Republicans took power, the annexationists took power. They were really depressed. They thought that the United States would come in and annex them and send the military to protect them. Why? They were a clear minority. They had only 13 men in this Committee of Safety. There was more than 100,000 people living in the Hawaiian Islands. How can 13 people, even 2,000 haole foreigners, maintain control? Well, their ability to control Hawaii rested in part with the Queen's insistence that we do nothing and that we wait for the United States. And lo and behold, it turns out she's right to a degree that Cleveland is going to restore the monarchy. But the long and the short of it is Cleveland never restores the monarchy. He chickens out because he can't get the political will of the United States behind the use of military power against Thurston, Dole, Freer, and others who are Hawaiian citizens but Americans by ancestry. See, what I'm saying is it was wrong, but it was done. And sometimes when you do something wrong, it sticks because it's hard to figure out the remedy or how to fix it. That's called a fait accompli. It's a fait accompli. What are you going to do? It was impossible for Cleveland to use American military Marines against Americans who look like Americans, were Hawaiian citizens like Thurston. He went to the mainland for school. He went to Yale and Columbia Law School. And the American public, although sympathetic to the Queen, said, how can you use the American military power to restore a monarchy over what looks like a democracy? The annexationists said we're a democracy because the United States its revolution was to overthrow a monarchy and establish democracy. So we had this limbo where the United States did not take Hawaii in 1893. Hawaii was still a nation with bad press. People were very critical of what the United States did and what the annexationists had done for overthrowing a friendly nation. But that was the status quo. Now, there was a royalist counter-revolution in 1895, led by Wilcox. I don't know if you know this, that there was an attempt to restore the Queen by military power. They hid the guns in the beaches and under the sands of Kahala. And these guns were brought in by ship from San Francisco, and there was going to be an attempt to retake the government. They probably would have succeeded, except someone the night before at a bar let the people know at the bar that there was this counter-revolution coming. The guns were in Kahala, so the annexation government was waiting for them, and it was doomed from the beginning. It was sort of like the Bay of Pigs in Cuba. Wilcox and other revolutionaries ran up to the mountains of Tantalus, and they were slowly hunted down. If you recall, the Queen was arrested. They said they found bombs on her house. Her house is Washington Place. They said, oh yeah, the coconuts are bombs. And she was placed under house arrest. And then the United States did something to maintain the status quo. It sent warships to Honolulu Harbor periodically just to make sure nothing changed. It didn't want a counter-revolution. It didn't know what to do. This was during the period of Cleveland. He couldn't get the United States to restore the sovereignty of Hawaii. And so he maintained ships. The Marines would land and they'd do their parades and training all around the palace to intimidate the Hawaiians. Don't try another counter-revolution. And so we had Liliuokalani go on trial, and we just had a play on that. a play that was put on by the Judiciary Center. It's a very sad trial. We had trials for Kuhio and others, and one of the big problems was that Iolani, during that time, when asked what she would do if restored about Dole and Thurston, she said, I cut off their heads. I cut off their heads. It's in the Constitution. If you're a traitor, you get your head cut off. And Cleveland went, oh my God, you know, can't you do something less? It's hard to sell this to the American public. Well, much later, the Queen retracted that and said, okay, maybe life in prison. But the American people didn't know what to do. These were Americans that you're talking about beheading. They're Americans, some were really American citizens. Most were Hawaiian citizens of American descent. So this went on for a while. In July of 1894, 1 year after the overthrow, the provisional government passed the Constitution saying, we are now a republic. Now they did that just for window dressing. They wanted to be called a republic because they were looking like a dictatorship. And so they passed this Constitution, but it was really the same thing. Only basically those people who swore allegiance to the annexation could vote in the Senate and the House. And that reduced the voting from 14,400, mostly Hawaiians, 9,900 Hawaiians voted in the last election before the overthrow, to some 2,000, mostly Haole sympathizers with the annexation. So they controlled the island. They had the backup of the United States in Honolulu Harbor, where there's a warship. And so this status quo remained until Cleveland left office. Now you got me in 1893, there's the overthrow. In 1894, there's the republic created. In 1895, there's a counter-revolution. In 1896, Cleveland leaves office. He hasn't restored the kingdom, but we have a new president. His name is William McKinley. Let me take a break for water. Now McKinley was pro-annexation. There was a group in the United States that wanted the United States to expand outward beyond the borders of California and go into China, go into the Philippines. They wanted to compete with other European nations which were expanding. And McKinley was one of that group. So McKinley supported annexation, and the first thing he did was okay another treaty to be drafted for the annexation of Hawaii. So in June of 1897, another group came from Hawaii to write a treaty, and they met with the Secretary of State of the United States, that was Sherman, I forgot his name, John Sherman. He became famous for laws in his name, and they put together a treaty that was very similar to the Treaty of 1893. But then, as Hanalei put it, the Kue petitions from Hawaii, 40,000 Hawaiians signed a petition. I got to see that in Washington last year. I got to see photocopies of the petition, and it's very carefully done and very neat, and it was organized a lot by women. I saw that one of the prime organizers was a Campbell, Alice Kwanakoa Campbell, and we had 40,000 signatures. So that meant, since only 14,400 Hawaiians were of voting age, a lot of young people voted on the petition, and a lot of elder people signed the petition. And when that petition showed up in the United States Senate, the Senate said, we can't pass this treaty. So what? That's treaty number 3. That's treaty number 3. The reason was it's not an American way, it's not a principle of democracy to force a government on a people. And the Hawaiians are against it. They were against it in massive proportions. U.S. senators came to Hawaii to investigate. They went to the churches would poll their members, and the members would say, we don't want to be part of the United States. So guess what? That treaty dies in the Senate. They don't even take a vote. They don't even take a vote because they know it's going to fail. It takes 2/3 of the Senate to ratify a treaty. So the Treaty of 1897 is the 3rd time that they try by treaty. And remember, treaty is the only way, other than conquest, by which you can take over Hawaii. So they failed. Then how did Hawaii become part of the United States? Well, it has to do with war. In 1897, right around the corner of December 1897, February 1898, the battleship Maine is blown up in Havana Harbor. It is a great excuse for the United States to go to war with Spain. But the studies of that explosion show that it was not Spain that blew up the ship. The ship blew up internally. One of the boilers exploded. And so it was an excuse for the United States to go to war with Spain. And why did they want to go to war with Spain? Because they wanted Spain's colonies, including the Philippines, which was a gateway to China, including Puerto Rico. And the annexationists here were jumping for joy, because if they're going to take the Philippines in a war with Spain, they may as well go take the Hawaii, because Hawaii was on the way to the Philippines, and they argued there was a good naval base and a good place to get coal. And someone asked, you need coal? And the ships need coal because they can't carry enough coal to go to the Philippines. Are the people in Hawaii denying you coal? No. No, they give us coal all the time. Then why do you have to take it over? Oh, it'd just be a good idea. It was a good idea from the point of view of the annexationists who wanted the United States to take Hawaii at the same time. Now the treaty failed. So how do you take Hawaii? Well, McKinley thought about it, and he thought, I can invade Hawaii, or let me try something called a law. Let's have the United States pass a law of 2 houses, the House and Senate, by which we take Hawaii. Well, you can't pass a law that takes territory of another nation. If so, other nations can pass laws in their parliaments or legislatures to take lands of the United States. Japan could pass a law to take laws of lands of California. The whole idea of a nation is you're absolutely sovereign within that nation, and nobody under international law can legally invade or pass a law that affects your country. But in March, they introduced the Newlands Resolution, and the Newlands Resolution was, what's the resolution? It was the annexation of Hawaii, and it's called the Joint Resolution. Joint not meaning jointly Hawaiian and U.S., it meant joint houses. The Senate and the House would pass it. Now, why would this work? Because you only need a majority to pass a law. You don't need the 2/3 that you need from the Senate. So they had a majority, and it was a wartime period, and during war there's a lot of support for our president. They'll give him anything he wants, and he says, okay, I want Hawaii. And the debates in the United States Senate, the opposition said, this is crazy, how can you do this? And I went to research that, and for the first time I was stunned, because I was taught that Hawaii was annexed by a joint resolution, but there were people saying it's impossible. Well, every piece of American territory that's been acquired, Louisiana Purchase, New Mexico and California, Oregon, Alaska has been acquired by treaty. Now, the Southwest, there was a war, but the war was concluded by treaty, so that the Spanish and the Mexican government did give cede to the United States, California, and the Southwest. But there's never been a treaty in the case of Hawaii. So the point I want you to take away from this is that the Spanish-American War occurs and the joint resolution is passed by a majority of both houses when they couldn't pass a treaty. And it's only a law of the United States. It's not a law in Hawaii. So you had Hawaii, which was a government of the annexationists who had signed a treaty, a draft treaty, but never the joint resolution. And you have the United States, which signed the joint resolution, but never the treaty. You cannot bang the two together and say they're one treaty, because the people in Hawaii, even though they were annexation, said, we don't like that joint resolution. It doesn't meet our requirements. It doesn't allow us to have slavery or indentured servitude. So there's never been a treaty by which the United States and Hawaii have agreed that Hawaii become part of the United States. And this is the argument that's being made internationally by Keanu's side. What I've discovered is that there are federal and state laws that actually have been affected by this in such a way that they can't define what the boundaries of Hawaii are. If you look in the laws of the United States and the laws of the state of Hawaii, the Constitution of the state of Hawaii, they don't describe Hawaii as Maui, Oahu, the island of Hawaii. They say it's the islands acquired by the joint resolution that are in the territory of Hawaii and in the state of Hawaii. Now, no island can be acquired by joint resolution, so there's nothing in the state of Hawaii, and it's the duty of the party first making the claim that has to prove that. So if you go into court, and I think Hanalei is talking about this, if you go into court, it's the prosecutor's duty, it's the judge's duty to show that you're in the state of Hawaii. Now, you cannot show that. And 20 or 25 years ago, I went into court in a foreclosure case, and I made the bank prove that the house that my client had in Hawaii Kai was in Hawaii, and they couldn't. And we let them simmer and stew for 4 months. The best they could do was say, Your Honor, if the professor's right, all of our foreclosures are illegal. Nothing has been legal here. And so then our strategy was not to force them to give up on the foreclosure, but to get them to see this point and hope that there would be a dialogue and a reconciliation. So we withdrew the motion. They went through the foreclosure. Later on, I went to a case about the island of Palmyra, and the island of Palmyra is a very complicated situation. I won't go into it, but Palmyra was taken by the Kamehameha IV as part of the Kingdom of Hawaii. It should be part of Hawaii today, but under the laws of the federal government and the state constitution admitting Hawaii as a state, they threw out Palmyra. And so you cannot find records for Palmyra in the Bureau of Conveyances. It's federal. You got to go with federal government. So in that case, I had a client and we sued basically because the client felt she was wrongfully denied part of Palmyra. She was a descendant of Kalama, and so she had a partial interest in it. But I got hit in the federal courts with a sanction, which is punitive, a punishment of $76,000. And that sort of stopped me. They gave the money to the other side, and nobody came to my assistance from the Hawaiian community, and nobody came to my assistance from the university. What happened to freedom of speech? I was doing my job as a professor. I wasn't being paid by the clients, and so I dropped out of sight for about 10 years. I was so depressed. This happened the week before 9/11, and so I haven't gone back into court. My license is inactive, but every time Hawaiians go into court and claim that the United States is not legally does not legally have jurisdiction in Hawaii, they turn the tables on you. They say, you prove it. You prove that the United States is not legally part of the United States. And you go and you present all these briefs and papers, and then what is the judge who has the ultimate power going to say? Oh, you're wrong, or Renzo, or another case. Even if you're right, the point I'm making is the duty is on the prosecuting attorney. The duty is on the bank that's foreclosing to prove that you were if it's a prosecution, you're in the state of Hawaii, and if it's a land case, the land is in the state of Hawaii. So my book is about this failure of the United States to acquire the Hawaiian Islands. And what does that make the relationship between the United States and Hawaii? Well, technically it's an occupation. It means that the United States is here not acquiring the sovereignty of Hawaii, because you cannot do that under international law, but it's here to, under trust, govern Hawaii. And the rules of occupation are you must leave as soon as possible. As soon as your military reasons for existing in that country end, you must leave. That's like the United States in Iraq. The United States acknowledges it occupied Iraq, but it's leaving, it's promising to leave, and Afghanistan is promising to leave. It took over the government. When you take over the government under occupation, you're supposed to run the government the way it would be run by the sovereign nation of that state. You're not supposed to take property from citizens and civilians of that state. There are a lot of rules. A lot of these, as you know, have all been violated by the United States. They've stayed way too long. They're using this island as a military base. But they have sold us the fiction that the United States acquired Hawaii. So I said no to representing people in court. But my book will tell this story. And how do I feel about what's going to happen in the end? Well, it's going to be very difficult to kick the U.S. out. That's not a reality in many ways. But the truth has to be told first. And the truth has to get around, and the United States has to acknowledge the truth. And the truth will lead to something. Clearly it should lead to monetary reparations. It should lead to, maybe it leads to, you divide the state of Hawaii, you keep one little part as a state, the rest becomes a sovereign independent country. Maybe you don't apply the U.S. laws so that it makes it illegal to have a Kamehameha school. You know, the United States is the bully in the world, but it will be embarrassed. And that's what Keanu Sai is trying to do, is to embarrass them, and he's trying to basically revive the monarchy. The idea of reviving the monarchy requires you to say that the United States never acquired Hawaii, but that would mean the annexationists come back to power. The government of the Kingdom of Hawaii that Keanu is with says that government is illegal because of the overthrow. So that's a second step. So he makes a two-part argument, and he goes back to the civil laws of 1859. He skips the Constitution of 1887, the Bayonet Constitution, and goes back before that to the Constitution of 1864. So it's a complicated argument to get the monarchy restored. I'm saying one thing, which is what I can prove, which is the United States never acquired Hawaii. You go figure after that who gets to vote whether or not the monarchy comes back. I'll do my part, and I'm saying the laws as being enforced in Hawaii violate the Hague Convention and occupation, and Hawaiians have been right. They've been treated as frivolous and trivial litigants. They've been harassed, they've been sanctioned like myself, and maybe that's not the way to go now, because we're never going to win in front of one judge. We have to win in the minds of the public, and we have to educate the public and to educate the world. But I would say my experience with that foreclosure case, they cannot answer it. If you do it right, they cannot say. They're going to find some clever way, because everything would be wrong. All sort of purchases of homes, all contracts, every legal case was without jurisdiction. Now that's too big for them to turn back. There's so much water under the bridge, they'll figure out something. That's why you never hear the story that I'm telling, which is basically, if you look at it legally, there is no jurisdiction by the United States. The last thing I want to say is, maybe we're coming around because in 1986, the United States, when asked in a memo by the State Department how it got Hawaii, said, we don't know. And when you don't know and you have the burden of showing that you know, you cannot go to Sears, bring back your laptop, and they say, okay, we'll repair it, but is it yours? I don't know. Where's your receipt? Oh, the paper. The paper would be, the treaty would be the paper. Oh, I don't have a receipt. You're not going to get service. The problem is the United States doesn't have a receipt for the taking of Hawaii. Thank you.
And thank you.
Any questions?
Who was Prime Minister when Iolani was on the throne?
Prime Minister of Hawaii? I don't know.
But, you know, usually, isn't it the Prime Minister who is the executive?
Under the Hawaii Constitution of 1887, I don't know the answer to that. I think maybe that's one of the reasons the Queen wanted to change the Constitution. She wanted more power back in the throne. So I don't know the answer to that.
Well, let's see. Walter Murray Gibson was Prime Minister under Kalakaua.
Right.
I don't know if he continued as Prime Minister. They named that building after him.
I don't think he was Prime Minister under the Queen.
Okay.
It doesn't sound right. But you may be very right that the Prime Minister was the executive.
And of course, when she abdicated, just like if Queen Elizabeth abdicated today, nothing happens.
Nothing happens.
Charles becomes king.
Yeah.
So if Iolani abdicated, the diplomatic successor could have been Iolani.
Well, she abdicates much later after the Republic of Hawaii is set up, and there's a new nation, and and the Republic of Hawaii does not consider her queen. So her abdication later is given no legal effect by the Republic of Hawaii. You know, after her house arrest, they just ignored it, yeah. In other words, you're right. They should have given it to the next Hawaiian in line, but it wasn't a monarchy any longer.
Well, of course, the provisional government was illegal too.
The provisional government was illegal in our eyes today, but nations did recognize it, so they considered themselves legal. Any other questions? Yeah.
I got a question. In the Blount report, I'm not sure what page, Blount, I guess in an interview with the Queen, uncovers some information about the Queen finding out arms coming to the shores here, and some of these, I guess, some of the citizens were walking around with arms. And when asked this to her husband at the time, he mentions secret society, the Knights of Pythias. It's in the Blount report. I'm not sure the exact page, but in my research I found out that the Knights of Pythias got the first charter from the U.S. Congress. The Boy Scouts was the second. And the Knights of Pythias often supplemented local authorities in the South, backed by industry finance, to stir up stuff and, you know, come in and intervene. And so, in your book, is there any part in which you look at the social
I'll put that in. I didn't know about that.
Networks in Hawaii, the secret societies that have to be registered?
Not yet. Not yet, but that's very interesting. I didn't know that. The Knights of Pythias supported the annexationists.
They were chartered under the U.S. Congress,
so
it could have been the conflict that Cleveland was dealing with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting. I didn't know that either.
So they have to kill those guys as well to restore the monarchy.
Well, they had a contract with them, right, with Congress.
Oh, right.
They had appropriated.
Oh, okay.
Which is how they were able to get their arms.
Oh, I see, the Honolulu rifles. Or,
Yes.
Yes.
Ah,
Makes sense.
that makes sense.
So yeah, I was just interested to know if your book covered any of these.
No, I didn't.
topics, and-
I'm basically a legal guy, so I go through the treaties, and once I prove that the United States is not here, I sort of make the focus what to do about it. That would be good for historians, and that would support my argument that Cleveland was stuck. But I also support the illegality of the United States interference with Hawaii.
Would it also in a sense support U.S. position of conquest?
If the United States wants, it could take a position that it conquered Hawaii, but that would be illegal today. It would have been illegal back then.
Because as I understand it, the position on conquest didn't become illegal under international law until the 20th century. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So at the time, it was okay.
Yeah. One thing we could do is use this to push the United States to the position that, okay, we took Hawaii by conquest. And if we did that, well, you have to consider, well, it's the reaction that would be critical, the international condemnation. Since we're condemning, the Soviet Union, since we're condemning other nations. Right. But in reality, they took us by conquest. I mean, this is a conquest.
Wasn't it Cleveland that made the statement that it reflected very poorly on the posture of the United States?
Oh yeah.
And from an international standpoint. But
oh
anyway,
yeah.
So if I may carry along with this conversation, for me this is very, very good information, because now we're having very concrete information. Legal scholars who have investigated and have brought this to our attention, and we've been on this, but never quite concisely as you've been able to present it. And so one of the things that you have brought up is that the United States is never going to go away. Okay, and I think that's a true reality. And so part of the things that I'm doing is that, okay, let's just say they're allowed to stay, and that we have to deal with this so-called ceded lands thing.
Yeah.
Now, under the trust obligations, they're because the ceded lands were identified as the illegally confiscated property of the Hawaiian Kingdom government and Hawaiian that was put into a trust, right? And that trust obligation went to the United States, and then was passed to the state of Hawaii as a condition of annexation. I mean, a condition of statehood under the Admissions Act. In fact, actually under Article 5,
Right.
5F, transferring the trust obligation to the state of Hawaii. So the lands, and this is where we're having a hard time, because they keep on changing the definition. First they called it the ceded lands, they recognized it as ceded lands, and now it's becoming the property of the state of Hawaii.
Right.
Right? This is where I believe a challenge should be. So what I'm trying to find out now, and I'm trying to execute, is that if it is in fact a trust that was passed to the state of Hawaii as part of what's the proper word?
Annexation?
Or a covenant.
Covenant.
A covenant with the United States as a covenant within the Admissions Act. Yeah. Then the state of Hawaii is merely a trustee of those lands. And therefore, what I'm looking at is they continually take over places calling themselves the state of Hawaii. And a classic example of that is on the Big Island. Right now we got the 30-meter telescope coming up, and we also have the military taking over the entire Saddle Road. Okay? And these are all ceded lands. And so part of my argument that I'm using for Mauna Kea is that Mauna Kea's ceded lands And under the Ceded Lands Trust, there are 5 beneficiaries, one of which is Hawaiian. The rest being education and the public. Okay, and so part of my reasoning I'm using is that the University of Hawaii is the one who's petitioning for all these telescopes. But these telescopes are being leased out to private entities and to other countries like Canada, France, Japan National, Subaru scope, and now the 30mm scope, which is a multinational. And it's not being done for the purposes as defined under the Ceded Lands Trust. And so what I'm saying to them is that clearly you cannot take private property or public property, considered public property under the Ceded Lands Trust, and use it for private gain under third-party leases without, thank you very much.
I can't eat, I'm sorry.
Without compensation back to the trust.
All right, I agree.
So it's actually produces a condition of an abandonment of fiduciary responsibility, which is an action that can be taken in the court.
Right.
And so what I'm doing, along with what you're doing and your information, is being able to show that even if the United States doesn't want to admit it was illegally taken Hawaii, the fact that it passed on the trust obligation to the state of Hawaii, it still remains the main trust because it that's the trust.
Even if I'm wrong,
yes.
You're right.
Yes, and that's what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is that somehow or another these things both complement each other.
Yeah.
And so what I've been in the position of doing over these years is setting up what I've come to understand as a judicial remedy, exhaustion of judicial remedy and administrative remedy, by having them deny me constantly that these factors exist. And I'm at a point now where I'm about ready to try enter into the court as a beneficiary of the ceded lands and also an heir to the kingdom lands, which those trusts were set up for, and to challenge the state for the abandonment of fiduciary responsibility by not protecting the trust corpus and for utilizing it for personal gain and utilizing it just to sell interest to third-party interests that do not contribute to the state.
Well, that you can do without my argument anyway. I mean, there's a trust that's in 5F.
Yes.
So even if there is a state, even if the United States is here and there's jurisdiction, you're right that it's a violation of the trust, and they're not giving or respecting their responsibility to Native Hawaiians under 5F.
Under 5F, yeah. And so, for me, from my standpoint, I kind of look at it as a realist. The United States is not going to go away. They've gone just about as far as they're going to go as far as admitting it. Although your studies and the things like Keanu Sai and them are doing, which is challenging the mortgages and whether you're in the state of Hawaii or not, those kind of things are all relative because they all connect. But if they fail, I believe that the third question to be asked is now, have they abandoned the fiduciary responsibilities to the trust corpus? And so I'm exhausting these remedies by challenging them on and putting it to their face that you have an obligation under the 5F clause that you are abandoning, just to complement what everybody else is doing. So we're going to win on one side or the other, is my theory. Do you feel that?
I'm pessimistic about winning in the courts.
Yeah, okay.
And to me, it's got to be a civil disobedience, a public movement. Maybe everybody gets arrested and they can't, everybody makes the same argument that there's no jurisdiction. It's going to be something more than, the courts are clever.
Yes.
The courts are too clever. They don't want to say, the judge doesn't want to say, I'm here illegally. He's got a judge, he's got a job, He's a part of the state. The state is not going to stay. They've played this for more than 100 years.
Okay.
Another question. It seems that the United States is trying to use the annexation as a validation that they purchased Hawaiian Kingdom for $4 million as part of the language that's in the annexation.
You know,
as they had purchased the Louisiana Purchase and all of the other purchases in their agreements. They're trying to validate that. My question is, basically, is that they did so, but they bought stolen property. Now, a stolen property constitutes fraud. Fraud has no limitation.
right. I don't think they even paid the $4 million. I think that shows up. Yeah, I think that shows up somewhere.
The organic no?
Somewhere they never paid a $4 million. So they never bought it.
And so part of this, part of my reason for being here, part of the continuing conversation is going to be about how we do direct actions, not get arrested. And knowing that we have all
I
these
think
things,
we got to follow the models of Gandhi and Martin Luther King. In other words, yeah, we're going to get arrested, but you're going to force the government to realize that it's wrong. In other words, civil disobedience is you violate the law, but you knowingly violate the law in terms of a higher law, and that the law is wrong. And you embarrass the government into admitting that. It's too easy for them to get rid of me. They got rid of me 20 years ago, or 2001. I had press conferences. I was on KITV. People thought I was kooky. So now I'm going to dedicate myself to education and let other people, sort of help with that education and develop a mass movement. See, I admire what Keanu is doing, but one court, even if it's the ICJ says something, the United States does not have to, follow it. The ICJ has jurisdiction when the United States joins.
Yeah, no, the United States is not party to the ICJ, right?
It is, but it won't. You have to have a suit in which both parties say, okay, we'll go together. Right. Nicaragua and the United States, something like that. What Keanu is trying to do is show other countries that they are in breach of their treaties to the Kingdom of Hawaii. And you're not protecting me as you promised you would. You have a treaty with the Kingdom of Hawaii. And he's getting somewhere with that. But it's, part of it is, this is such a complex argument that most people don't want to hear it because most people are not Hawaiians. They're comfortable as coming in, as colonialists, as settlers. They buy houses, and that is a violation of the Hague Convention, is to settle your own citizens in the occupied territory. In other words, if we took everybody from Indiana and moved them to Iraq,
yeah, same thing.
That would be an illegal act. So the United States has basically created a situation where Hawaiians are outnumbered politically. And then they say, well, what's the vote going to be? And part of it is they have used innocent people that came here under the false guise, the falsehood that Hawaii was part of the United States. So there's been a misrepresentation by the United States.
Isn't that considered a constructive fraud?
Yeah.
Well, it's an actionable thing also, is it?
Well, we got them on the law. That's what. Yeah. You got them on the law.
And now what, right?
And now what? We had them on the law a long time ago.
One of the things that they also did, among all of the things, first of all, let me say, it's sad that the people of Hawaii did not get behind him. That's bad.
Well, yeah.
You stood up, okay? What they did in 1890, of course, two things. 1894, they transferred crown lands to government.
Right.
1895, they created a Land Act.
Right.
A Land Act offered 999-year leases. 1920, Hawaiians were happy getting 99-year leases for 5,001 acre.
That's because they
999-year leases.
there's still
This was to bring in people, attract them to come.
Yeah.
Yeah. It backfired on them.
yeah because the Hawaiians were smart in getting those leases.
And they filed. Irwin, Kapulioli, Palobo.
They got 990-year leases, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was one of them. He
And
was an athlete from St. Louis.
that's
popular
actually-
guy. Beautiful, handsome Hawaiian. A lot of Wahinis around here. What happened is one of his 3 or 4 wives came in after he died and exposed it with this other first, then second wife in Palola. He got it. And they had a big scene. And all of a sudden it came out these 999-year leases.
That's a terrific story.
Yeah.
And there are quite a few of them in Makiki, Tentless Drive. And this was solely, like you mentioned, about attracting people to come here, to reinforce your numbers, yeah? I mean, anybody would go anywhere with 999 leases.
I understand that it was because of this 999-year leases that even Hawaiians were grabbing them.
Yeah.
The 999 leases.
That's why they shut it down. In 2 years, they shut it down.
And that's when they came up with the Hawaiian Homestead Act to bring it down to 99 years.
Yeah. But too many Hawaiians got aware of it. And they were
There's
fighting.
still a bunch of those 990-year leases on Hawaii.
Yeah.
Another question. So in your book, do you conclude that that the situation we're in or we're under is occupation?
Yes.
And would you then, I guess, suggest that the occupation laws or the laws of occupation apply in this situation?
Yes. Yeah.
So so from there, my question would be then, under the occupation regime or the laws of war, damages are accepted to a large extent, right?
There should be damages.
So would that be safe for us to apply to our situation?
Well,
Because in a sense, if we would apply the occupation regime, then we would be allowing a large degree of damage to our sites and everything else, right? Is there another framework or regime under which you think Hawaii would be better suited?
I think the truth is this occupation or conquest, as you put it.
I've heard a very different, a differing opinion on what an occupation is, and this is like people like Kuhio Volter, who comes out and talks about that an occupation means boots on the ground, and that the boots are on the ground for a certain amount of time. And we've been having this conversation for years and years and years to try to figure out what it is. And so, and because the Hague Convention, the 1906 Hague Convention on military occupations, which we were speaking of, happened after the Woodrow, that what I believe that we can actually agree upon, that the condition that we have is we have an illegal overthrow, we have an illegal military occupation, and now we have the civilian arm of that military occupation employing what's the word now? Employing shucks, I lost the word, wait, hang on.
Coercion?
Yeah, it's not, word's not coercion. They use coercion. Not occupation. It's, they use colonial tactics, colonialism tactics to give us the impression that they have a legal presence here by colonizing us and implementing their own government. And again, this is why I bring up the Cedar Lands Trust, because that's one of the first things under a statement that had a legal ramification for breach. And so, anyway, so I know, Mr. Chang, that you have to leave. You have an appointment.
Yeah.
So I would like to thank you very much for honoring us for your presence here. And
off the record.
yes, well, it can be still on the record, yeah.
I was put away 1 year
Oh.
for my stand as being a Hawaiian national.
Oh.
I went against the state of Hawaii. This was a tax case. I had filed for my return. I said I have no obligation to. This only involved 2 years. They returned the moment I cashed the check, I got indicted. Now, I appealed my case, I beat them basically. I beat them because they didn't want to bring me back into court because of jurisdiction. They didn't want, I stimulated some crap in your court.
Oh, you're a hero.
Yeah, but anyway, my question is, I'm looking for counsel so I can go back in. Now I spent 1 year in prison at old CCC. I figure maybe $1,000 a day, right? And you represent me. I'm willing to give you your $76,000 that they took away from me.
Well, I gotta write the book first. I'm inactive. There'll be people who write the book. People will do these cases.
You know, I think it is a brilliant idea for you to read that book because of your.
He's almost followed it too.
Yeah. Because you can get to know people.
Yeah.
Who's your publisher? When you went to
I don't have a publisher yet.
When you were chastised in court, how many Hawaiians? You turn around and count how many Hawaiians were there?
None.
You write that book, you're going to get hundreds of thousands. Not only here, but people Hawaiians that are living outside of Hawaii itself.
Yeah, and that's been the problem, is that we've never had a clear, precise history on the legality, and now we're coming to that point. This is the year of the huli, I believe, because now we have so much information, and things are coming around, and information is accessible quickly.
Okay, and huli.
Huli ako.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. In fact, we were talking about the prophecy chant of Kapei, where he says, "E iho aluna e pi ano lalo e hui ana namoku e ku ana kapaya," and it says that which is above will come down, that which is below will rise up, and that the people will come together as a hui, and the nation will restand. Again, Mr. Chang, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming down.
Hello.
Okay, now I gotta see if I'm healthy.
You gotta go for a stress test.